So I'm going to move into a bit of a different topic and a different part of the Power Platform. This one I must be honest, I don't know much about. But Asanka here is the expert in Power BI, and I'm hoping to learn quite a lot today from him. So I'll hand over and we'll get started.
Yeah, that's nice. Cool. Thank you very much for having me here, and I think thanks for all the organizers to doing all the hard works, and good to be here. Cool. In my session, we're going to talk about Power BI, especially with the partition management. A little bit of a technical and in-depth session. So I just want to know, like, out of you, how many of you have worked with the Power BI, and just to get an idea, like, what's your expertise or what's your exposure to the Power BI? How many of you have worked with the Power BI? Okay, 1, 2, 3. We have a few guys working. So when you say work with the Power BI, how many of you have done actual modeling? Create your own model, create Power BI reports and everything. Star schema and everything. What's your exposure on that? If you can raise your hand, like you have actually done the Power BI modeling and everything. Yep, we have a couple of people. Yeah, cool. So seems like a lot of people are not in depth in the Power BI, so I try to make it like more light as possible in the session, right? Cool. Bit of an introduction to myself. Sorry, I'm in Teams now. A sec. Right. My name is Asanka Padmakumara. I'm a Microsoft MVP for data platform in New Zealand, and I've been working to data and related technologies for almost 12 years now. I do work on the business intelligence, data warehousing, data engineering, anything to do with the data. So you can connect me with my LinkedIn. You can follow me in the Twitters, as well as you can go to my blog where I talked about all the data and related technology, data warehousing, all those things, right? Cool. Power BI, right? So I know that all of you, like people who have worked with the Power BI, you are familiar with how the Power BI works. You have the Power BI desktop. You start Power BI desktop. Do the modeling, create reporting, and everything. But if you go to Task Manager, once you open the Power BI desktop and you open the Task Manager, under Power BI, you will see the heap of other processors created under the Power BI, right? Out of that process is like Microsoft Analysis Services, right? So if you are familiar with, again, going back to the data technologies, Microsoft Analysis Services is actually about all technology, and they're rebrand over re-engineering in 2012 as they introduced the tabular engine, right? So that is what actually used behind the scene in Power BI to store the data. So when you see the Power BI, you have the visual component where you do all the visual things, you do the chart and everything. But where does the data go? The data is actually stored in the Microsoft Analysis Services, right? You don't see it, you don't get that, you don't get access to that one directly. But if you see behind the scene, that's where your data is. Now, if you go to Microsoft Analysis Services, right, this is how it sits. You have Microsoft Analysis Services tabular engine. On top, you have the Power BI, the visual part, right? So we call that as a storage engine. Now, back in the days, when we start working in the tabular engine, we had the opportunity to go to the actual tables within the Power BI, what's it behind, and we could basically create partition, right? Why would we create partition? We will talk in next slides, but we had that opportunity to do that. Right? For example, like let's say that you have one table called internet sales. You could create small partitions. Let's say that the sales from 2005 in one partition, 2006 in one partition, 2007 in one partition, likewise, right? We had that capabilities when we were working in the Analysis Service tabular engine. Same, capabilities still there, but we don't get that exposure because of using a different tool, the Power BI, right? Again, let's try to understand why we did partitioning, right? What's the reason? So first thing is like when you want to refresh the data, what happened in the Power BI, they actually go to the source system and bring the data, right? But if you have a slower refresh performance, if you have a partition, which means that you can get the flexibility of you don't refresh everything at once, you refresh individual partition. Let's say that you have one big table, like we have like maybe 100 million records in that table. Rather than bringing everything from the table, the 100 million records, you can break into maybe like 10 partitions with that 10 million records. And then what you can do is like if the refresh performance is like slow, you can refresh each and individual partition, or you can do a parallel partition with a parallel refreshing as well, right? The other thing is like when you have the memory issues, again bringing everything at once will create a memory issues. Like if you go for like certain Power BI models. Let's say that you have large data model, right? When you try to refresh it, it causes memory issues and it gives you an error from the Power BI service saying that there's no enough memory to refresh this model, right? So you can consider partition in that scenario. And again, if you want to do a custom refresh, which means that you don't want to refresh everything always. The customer come back and say that, okay, there are certain set of data, or let's say that the last 5 weeks of data has been updated. Can you refresh your model, right? But if you have like one big table which has like 100 millions of records which coming from like 10 years data, and if you want to refresh it, even if the data has changed for like 5 weeks, you have to refresh everything. But imagine if you have like a partition here where you have a 5 weeks partition and you have like one partition for all the rest of the data, or maybe like all the rest of the data for all the years. You don't have to refresh that big portion, whereas you can only refresh the smaller data, right? Cool. And then the most important thing, which I'm going to use this to get into the next slide, where you want to have a real-time data while not compromising the in-memory. We all know that when you have the data in memory, which is fast for the report, right? But the problem is like when you want to go the in-memory, you compromise the the latency, which means that the data is changing in your source system right now, but you can't go back and get that data because you want to bring everything at once, and then your refresh take a couple of hours to do that. So you can't get the real-time data every time. You can't always hit on the refresh button to get the real-time data, right? But if you have an ability to do that, where you can bring the real-time data as well as you can keep the rest of the data which is not changing the in-memory, that is where you can consider the partitioning, right? Cool.
Is there any limitation for the partitioning? How many partitions that we can do?
No, there's no limitation on that one. Yeah. Right. Let's understand what are the options we have in when we use the Power BI. So we have the import model. So when you want to bring the data from source system, put into the memory, that's where I use the import model. So bring everything from the source system to the Power BI model, right? The other one is like the direct query, which means that you don't bring anything from your source system. By the time the user view the report, it creates a SQL statement or whatever the query that is actually using, and pass that SQL statement to the source system. These are two options. One, you bring the data. The other one is you send the query and bring the data real time. So the direct query is you send the query and bring the data. So at that time, what you have is like low latency, because what's available in the source system is available for your report at this moment. But the problem is like it actually gives you a poor performance when you have like a complex dashboard, right? The other one is import mode, which means that it gives you a low latency because data is available in source systems, not available in your model right now unless you do a refresh. But the performance is really good, right? These are the two things we had, right? But Microsoft introduced something else, or probably introduced something else called hybrid table. So that is what I'm going to mainly cover on, and then we're going to cover on the how we can how we can customize this hybrid table approach and create our own partitioning as well, right? Now, how does hybrid table work? Again, as I said, you have a table. So imagine this blue box is a table, right? One big table which have like 100 million records, right? Either you bring it as import mode to your memory, or you go as the direct query, which means that you don't bring anything. Everything is actually the metadata in your Power BI model. If something is required, you will send the query at that time you refresh, right? What they did was like they introduced something else. They broke down this one table into multiple pieces. That is where the partition comes to play. So again, what you have is like one table broken down into multiple partitioning. Some of the partitions you can define as archive, which means that those data, every time you refresh it, those data will not come to your model, right? Because you know that those data will not get updated. Imagine like you have one table with 100 million records, which data is like 12 years old. Obviously, those, apart from like a couple of months data in the maximum scenario, those data will not get refreshed. So you don't want to bring that data again, right? Then there could be some data which will get updated, right? So which means that you want to go back and bring that data every time you make a refresh. So that is we call the incremental refresh model, the window, right? And there will be some data in your model which is updating right now. The resource system is updating right now. Your ERP system or whatever system is updating right now. That data you cannot bring it all the time. So what you can do is like for that small piece of data, the window, you ask them to go back live. You go and the source system right now and bring the data. But everything you don't see it in the Power BI. Everything is done from the Microsoft, the Power BI side. You just create a one table. They understand that okay, for this span it will be incremental. This span I don't want to do any refresh. This archive, and this span is actually the direct query. I go to source system and bring the data while you view the report, right? So what does the hybrid table offers? It offers fast in-memory performance. The reason is like you still have the data. The most of your data is still in your memory, so you don't compromise anything. You don't want to go to source system for all the data, right? The other one is like up-to-date data in direct query, which means that if you want to get the up-to-date data, that's also possible in the same table. You don't do any changes, right? And inbuilt incremental refresh, which means that you don't have to worry about like bringing everything always. You define the time span saying that only bring the data when you refresh it, when you schedule refresh it, only bring the data within this span. Don't bring everything else, right? And yeah.
Doing an incremental backup.
Sorry.
Similar to idea to an incremental backup.
Kind of, yeah. So which means that you don't do all the backup everything. So in this case, we don't have something called the backup. What happens is like you only bring the data which is required for that time, right?
So actually, audit query is just for the fact tables, and the dimension tables can be imported.
Yes, you can do that. The thing like we don't define it saying that this is the fact table, the dimension table. As far as your table is very massive, you can say that okay, let's say there are millions of records. You can define it for the hybrid table approach. But in most cases, like almost all the cases, it will be the the fact tables, and the dimension table again. It can be in memory, right? So you can do the the hybrid approach where you have all the dimension models are in memory and the other ones are in the what do you call it? Normally what we do is like we define it as a dual actually, not in memory. I'm not going to detail that one. There's another mode called dual, which means that Power BI decides that it goes to the source system at that time or it uses the data available in the memory at that time. Because the reason is like, I'll give an example. Like for example, like let's say that you have the data in the fact table, which is in memory at that time. It will go to the source system and do the join at that time, the source system, rather than pushing those dimensional data back to the source system, right? So at that time, it actually do everything in memory. Sorry, everything in the source system, right? Cool. Again, it's less resource utilization in the capacity, which means that same problem. If you have a very large model, if you want to refresh everything at once, it needs a lot of resources. So you can minimize it by having a hybrid table because you cut down your refresh data volume, right? Cool. Let's try to understand what are these scenarios where we can use with a real example, right? So in this scenario, let's say that you have sales data, right? You know that after like 2022 August, none of data will change, right? So what you define is like you define that time period, you define this date saying that after like 2022 August 1st, I don't want to do any refresh. Or I don't want to bring the data again. Only in the initial refresh, I want to bring the data. Rest of the refresh, I don't want to bring that data because those data will not change, right? And then you define a time span saying that from 2nd of August to the end of October, that data will change. Eventually, there will be some changes happening to your invoices. So you define that every time you make a refresh, only bring that data. And then you can define that from the beginning of the November, this month, everything you have in the transactions, I want to see it in the real time, right? This is one scenario that you can define the hybrid table approach or the incremental refresh. Or what you can define is like, rather than having like all those, small, the partition, you can define only two partitions saying that everything from the 2021 1st of January, nothing will change. There will not be any incremental refresh, which means that you have one thing that you do in the initial refresh, and then you have a smaller portion, which is the latest data in current year, that is everything is direct query. right? Which means that you don't have to do refresh at all, because you only do the refresh it initially, right? So which means that every time, because a large portion is always the older data. So which means that if you have data come from 2012 to 2020 on the current date, you define that you only do a refresh one time, right? And then you will not do your refresh your data set at all, because it's, stale data, it will not change. But if you think that anything is changing, you can make that portion of any data in your current year as a direct query, right? Or you can do the other way around. What you can do is, like, if you have very large data volume, like your source system is like maybe 400, 500 million records, right? But as a business, you hardly go to that historical data to analyze. You always analyze the latest data, maybe like data from like 2 years ago, but you don't go to back in like 5 years or 7 years. Your business user don't do that analysis. You do it, but once in a while, like once in a while blue moon thing, that you sometimes they want to do some kind of analysis. They go to source system and get the 5 years data and analyze with current data. But what they normally do is, like, they analyze the data for last 2 years or 3 years, right? So in that case, what you can do is, like, you create a one partition in direct query which has the data from 2 years ago, right? So in that case, because data volume is so big, you can't bring into the Power BI. I'm talking about like millions of records. You can't push, compress everything in the Power BI model. But what you can do is, like, you can compress 2 years data into your model. So in there we have like 50 million. Think like you have like 450 millions of all the data, or like 500 millions of all the data. 450 millions will be after 2 years. Like 50 million will be like 2 years data. You can bring that 50 million records into Power BI model because it's relatively smaller, right? But again, you have to know that your business user will not always go to all these 5 years of data, right? So in that case, what you can do is, like, you can define one partition with direct query which has the old data, stale data, and you have the one partitioning which has the latest data, and business users are already always using, right? So that's the other scenario that you can use, right? The fourth scenario is, like, again, if you have important data and the less important data. So I'll take an example. Right? For example, like in a business that you have multiple branches, you have multiple stores or something like that, right? So they're going to introduce a new branch, new store, or new product or something like that, right? So the marketing team, they want to see the newly introduced business model. It could be branch, it could be store, it could be the product. They want to see what's happening as of now, the current business on that product or in that store, right? So what you can do is, like, if the data is less important, where you can compromise for like day -1 report or day -2 report or weekly report, that part you can have it like a import mode, right? Which means that it's not instantaneous what's happening. But let's say that the business is saying that this portion of the business or this part of the business or this store, this branch, I want to see what's happening right now. That section within the same table, you can define it as the direct query. So whatever happening with a new transaction come to that branch, it will get updated in your dashboard. But if the transaction is happening in some other store which is not important, it will be reflected in day -1 or in yesterday's report or the weekly report, likewise.
Sorry, in this case, we should have partitioning based on the location, not
Yes.
time.
Yes,
Yeah?
yes. I'll show in the demo as well, right? So I'll cover that on the demo. Right? Cool. Let's go to the demo. It's a demo time. Interesting guy, kind of famous right now. Cool. Right. So what I've done is, like, might have to. Duplicate this one. Yeah, I duplicate my screen. So what I've done is, like, I have a fact table, right? So this is my, all the dimension table. I have all the tables. I have one fact table, which has like 64 million, almost 65, so 64 million records in my fact online table. Right? So this is the model table that I'm going to use to visualize this, how the partitioning works, right? And then if I on this query to see how many records we have for each year, we have like I don't know, 3-4 millions for each year. So this is like from 2007 to 2022 we have records. 2022 we don't have much of the record, but for all the other years, like we have like 3 to 4 millions for each year, right? Then what I've done is like I have created a Power BI model, just bring in this table as it is. I don't do anything. But the first thing I'm going to show is like how you use incremental refresh in Power BI. For that, you need to go to the transformation. Some of you already might have done that, but you need to introduce if you want to do the incremental refresh, right? Not the other partitioning thing, because if you enable the incremental refresh, the partitioning automatically happens, right? Cool. So what I've done is like this is my table which is taken from the my data warehouse, and then I have introduced two parameters. How do you introduce parameters? You go to manage parameters and you can introduce a new parameter, right? So likewise, I have introduced two parameters. One is called range start and the range end. So these two names has to be, it can't be something else. It has to be range start and the range end. It has to be the type of date time if you want to use incremental refresh, right? This comes as the part of the partitioning as well, right? So I introduced these two, and then what I have done is like I have filtered.
Can you go back to that model?
Sure. Yep.
What was the,
Which
what
one?
was the suggested value?
You can have a default value in here, so you can say that the list of values of query, and likewise if you have like want to set a value, right? So this one you don't have any suggested values, you can have any value, right? Yeah, it's kind of drop down or something like that. You can say that these are the only value you can set it up. Cool. So what I've done is like, so in my fact table I have a date key which is coming from my source system, and I have done a filtration to my fact table saying that if you go to the transformations, sorry, one here, sorry. So you go to the table and you say that keep top values. This is the filtration. Oh, sorry, you can see in here, sorry. So I have added a step in here saying that, go in here. Yeah, sorry. So what I've done is like I do the raw filtration, and based on that, I say that from the range start and range end period, do the filtration on date key. So anything comes after this date and between this date, that's where I want to see in my model, right? But this is only for my development. So I'll show you what happened after that. So this is what I do. I introduce a raw filter based on my date key and the parameters that I had defined, right? And then once I close this one. Once I do that, because I have defined my parameters relatively smaller, which means that I have defined my parameters from the 1st of October to the end of this year, which have a smaller data set. I only have like a very small amount of data in my model, but still I can do the model development. So then what I do is like I go to my table and right click, and there's something called incremental refresh, right? When you click on that one, so by default it's disabled, and if you don't have those two parameters, it will not allow you to enable this one. So basically this option will be gray out, right? Now that I have those two parameters, I can enable it, right? Once I click on that one, it will give you another set of options asking like from which date or from which period you want to start your archive period, right? From which period you want to do your incremental refresh. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to say that I'm going to select years and say that I want to see all the data back to 12 years, right? Which means that if you say that there's data coming from the like 13 years ago, that data will not come to model at all, right? So you have to define that. Let's say that you have very large table and some of the data is not required for your model at all. Then you can define it saying that, okay, these are the only data I want to see in my model based on the archive start time, right? And then you can say that I know that my data is refreshing or changing up to like maybe 1 month or maybe 2 months, right? I can say that. In that case, from the refreshing time, let's say that I refresh it now, it go back to 2 months data. This is always dynamically changing, right? Let's say that you do it tomorrow. It start from tomorrow's date to 2 months back and bring everything from your source system, right? And then you can see how it's working in this visual one as well. So if you say that the refresh date, which is here, from the 2 months before refresh date, this portion will be incremental refresh. And then from the 12 years before the refresh date, from everything in here, it will be only in the initial load or the initial refresh. After that, it will not get loaded to your model, right? Anything after 12 years, if you have any data after 12 years, that will not be included in model at all, right?
For example, I want to see some project fall off life. Because the past year, it won't change, it's fixed, it's finished. So I know that what is the sales for the last year, but only I'm doing more in the refresh from the current year.
Yeah.
Right? So the past year I want to compare with, definitely I need to do the data from the last year also. So that will be the refresh, is it right?
No. So what happens is like, for last year, in this case, like when you do initial refresh, it will bring the last year data. Okay. But the subsequent refresh, it will not touch your last year data. Because we assume that we tell that in the archive period, those data will not change in your business.
Can you have a rolling before and refresh date? So a start and end, can you have that rolling?
It is always rolling. For example, like we
So like you actually, at the moment you've got it for the last month,
Mhm.
and then you actually define October 1st to December 30th. So that's a fixed date.
No. So how does it happen? Is
So
like
can you do a rolling dates? In other words, if you set up the table and you set up the process, then whatever happens from here on after, you'll always get the last month or refresh.
yeah, it is exactly how it works. So I don't define actual date. So if you can see that the refresh date is rolling. For example, the refresh date is today, but the refresh date is tomorrow.
Because you actually set the dates before, that's why.
Yeah. So it's always checking when the refresh is happening, and based on that day, it go back to 2 months. So you don't have to define anything. Like Power BI automatically
In 2
handles.
months' time,
Yes.
for that end date be February, for
Yes.
example.
Yes.
How about your data you refresh every 5 minutes?
Sorry.
How about your data refresh every 5 minutes?
You mean why
Every 5 minutes.
you want to refresh every 5 minutes? Or okay. Yeah. So if that's the next thing I'm going to talk about. So if you want to refresh it every 5 minutes, there's a limitation from the Power BI side as well. You can only do 8 refresh if you have the the Pro. If you have like Premium, you can only have 48 refresh. Right? So you can't do every 5-minute refresh to bring the data. So that is where this hybrid table concepts comes, because the next one I'm going to show is like once you do this one, there's another option called get the latest data real time in direct query. So in here, when you click on that one, you will see that this gets changes, and it only actually says that real time data will be from 1st of this month. So how does it work is like it actually, and this one is gray out because you can't, this is not optional, it's it's mandatory for the what do you call it, direct query partitioning, or what you call it, the real time data. So what happened is like if the data after this month, so this is the 1st of the January, so everything after this month, the complete month, it will be real time, which means that data the changes happening in your source system is always available in your model. Any questions? Is it clear, or you want to?
How define the latest data? The latest data is the one period of the latest data.
So it's again, so there has to be completed month. So for example, let's say that you define it today, the refresh happening today. Every data in current month, complete month, will be latest data, right? So because it has to be a completed month to Power BI to understand that whether it's the latest data. So that right now, it will be monthly, right? Cool. So once I apply that one and I publish the Power BI service, that is the only thing you can do from Power BI desktop to work on the partition. So let's say again going back to, so what I'm going to do is like, I just want to understand how it's work in this service. So for that, how many of you have used the third-party tools, something like DAX Studio, Tabular Editor, when you do the Power BI work? Only one? Anyone have used Tabular Editors before? Right. So the Tabular Editor is actually it has 2 versions. One is the commercial version, Tabular Editor 2, so Tabular Editor 3, and that's the free version, Tabular Editor 2. You can use both in the one that I'm going to show in this demo. So for this one, I'm going to use Tabular Editor 3. So what it does is like, sorry guys, cool. Yeah, sure. Cool. So this is the tabulator, but I'm going to start from the beginning. So if you go to the Power BI service, which is this one. So I have already created the demo. So I have all the, the Power BI files that I have used. What I'm going to do is like, I'm going to connect to my models in the Power BI service and show how the data is actually stored. For that, I'm going to get my workspace URL here, workspace connection. I'm going to copy it in here, and I'm going to open the tabular editor. Go to files, open model from the DB, and I'm going to connect to this one. It's already been connected. So I'm going to click connect. Right. And it will ask for your Windows authentication. I'm pretty sure it won't ask from me because I have already set that connection. And it will show me all the available models in my workspace. So the one first time I'm going to use is like, without doing any hybrid tables, without doing any incremental refresh, how do it look like in the normal file that if you publish the Power BI service? The first one is the original file. So if I click on this one, it will give you all the information about your Power BI model, or basically what's available in your tabular engine. So this is my table, factor online sales. And if I expand it, I have enabled the partitioning as well. You can see there's only one partition. This is the partition that actually created from the Power BI by default. If you don't do anything, if you publish a model, that is what you can see in the Power BI service, right? Then what I'm going to do is like, once the second one that I'm going to show is like, my first scenario where I have enabled incremental refresh, right? Because of the interest of time, I can't do everything from the scratch. So what I'm going to do is like, I'm going to connect to the second model that I have already created, which basically what has happened is like I enable the incremental refresh, publish it to service, and start the refresh. So once that's done, we'll see how it looks like in the partition inside. Let me show how long I have. Times. Sorry.
5 minutes.
Oh, correct. Okay, so what I can do is like at that time, now, because I enabled the incremental refresh, you don't create any partitioning. The Microsoft itself, sorry, created all those heap of partitioning based on the information you provided. So how does it work is like these partitions, whenever you do a new refresh, more partition will get added. Because you don't do it, Microsoft do it based on the time span. So when you get a new data, it will be a new partition. So all those partition, what will happen is like 2007 partition will only have the data in 2007 to 2008. And same goes to the 2010, likewise. And then what I'm going to show is like the more granular it comes, we start create a partition for a month, right? So that it will not, bring the data everything. For example, like if you think that if you want to refresh the data, it will, for the incremental refresh, it will refresh only this partition or to bring the data for the monthly partitioning. And the last one, from this one, all those partitions you see that my model is actually in import mode, right? All this partition, each partition is the import mode, but the last partition you see is actually in direct query mode, right? And then it says that they start from the 1st of January to the end of, this will change eventually. So this like this value is, always changes eventually. And what has happened is like this partition become a direct query partition, right? Cool. So that's how it works. And what I can show is like with this scenario. Sorry?
You continue it or does it automatically?
It's automatically created. I don't do anything. Only thing I do is like I can. So I can show you a scenario. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to quickly go to my data warehouse. I'm going to run this query. What it does is like it actually start inserting data to my data warehouse, so my source system. Right? Let me run this one, and then I'm going to go into the Power BI service. And this is scenario 1, the file that I've created. I'm going to go to this report, which has like set of all the data that I have just refreshed. Give me some time. Oh, come on. Right, so these are all the data I have. So you have like 4 million, 3 million, all those data, and I have the data for the 2012, 2022 as well. Let me expand this one. So what happened is like all those data you see for all the years, I actually import more, right? Then, so these are the data I have for my current year. What I'm going to do is like I'm going to edit this report, right? Sorry, and then I'm going to set the page refresh to the per seconds, like every 5 seconds. I want to refresh my page, right? Save this one, and let's see what's happening to this report. Let's keep your eye on this figure. What happens? It gives update. It's refreshing the value. The source data is coming because we are talking about 64 million records, but you don't see that 64 million records coming all the time. But what you see is like only a couple of million counts for the November data, and it's visible for your business user, right? If you had to do that in refresh every time you want to, like 5 seconds refresh your 64 millions, you pretty much, you can't do that, right? So everything is one table. You don't see like the partitioning and everything. You just do, couple of click and, everything, and you see the real data as well as the historical data without compromising your performance, right? So what I'm going to do is like, because I don't have a time, I'm going to show one more scenario, which is like the other one, basically, which is I'm going to connect to another model. The last scenario that I want to talk is about having one important data and one like less important data in the same model and see how it works. So let's go to my scenario 4. So in this one, I have 2 partitions, right? One is for the North region, North America region, based on my store. The other one is like for all the other regions. So which one is like this one is basically for all the other regions. I have one partition for the sales and I have one partition for the North America. So there might be business user says that I want to see the North America transaction real time. Same table, nothing changes, but only have 2 partitions, and let's see how it works. So in this case, what I'm going to do is like, while this one is running, I'm going to take another SQL statement, which basically insert the data for the North America. The previous one is only inserting data for, I think, check the European region, right? This new SQL statement, based on the store key, it actually insert the data for North America, right? So run this one, right? So both tables are getting updated right now, both to the, same table, both stores get the record for the same transactional table. And then I'm going back to my 4th model that I have already created. I'm going to enable the incremental refresh, page refresh for the page. So in this page, you can see that I have, it's coming up. Oh, come on. Sorry guys, I think I had to refresh it. Going on here. It's refreshed. Okay, what I'm going to do is like, there's another page that I can work it out for this one. Hopefully this one will work. Luckily, I have another backup. Hope this one will work. Yeah, so again, I have the data coming from the console online in one column, and then one have the European data, and one you have in the North America data. Again, as I said, like I'm inserting data for both the stores right now. Let's see if I make the page refresh for every 5 seconds, how does it visualize in my report, right? Please work. Yeah, you can see that the European one, even if I'm inserting data right now, it is the same, whereas like my North American region get the updated data in the same visual, right? So that's how powerful it is when you use the incremental refresh as the partitioning as well as the direct query in the same table. I don't have much table, so much time. My words even get get wrong. So I'm going to skip these 2 slides. What I'm going to do is like I'm going to hand over the slides to Hamish so that you can have a look on the slide. So basically, what it says, like to use the partitioning, you need to have the premium or premium for per user licensing, and there are some couple of other words around the how to use hybrid table. Cool. I don't have much time. I'm almost run out 2 minutes. Thank you very much for attending my sessions, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the session. Guys.
Thank you, Asanka. Very
Yes,
good.
guys.
Any questions, Asanka, before we?
Region. Sorry, go ahead. What's the question
And then
again?
the partitioning is by the time, by default.
If you use
But we can change it to some other thing, for example, the location or the category or,
yes.
I'm thinking maybe we can just change the partition based on the requirement.
Yes. So as I said, if you use incremental refresh, if I use incremental refresh what's available in the Power BI desktop, it has to be by time. But if you use a tool like Tabular Editor, you can define any partitioning by any category. For example, the last example you saw, it's actually partitioned by the store key. And you can use a join as well. You can use a query. It can be anything you use if you use the Tabular Editor to create your own partition. But Power BI desktop does not give you that feature. It has to be using the time.
It's like an API.
No, so the source should support direct query, right? I mean, you can create a partition, but to work it out, the direct query as well as import the same model, the source system should support the direct query. So any limitation you have for direct query